Did you know that there is much more to ruby than those overly processed, translucent red gemstones that you see in the mainstream? Today, we are going to discuss the world of real rubies, their meanings, answer your top 5 questions about ruby, and at the end, I will reveal if you are somebody who could benefit from ruby crystal properties. My name is Sheila from Satin Crystals, and I thank you for liking our video and subscribing to our channel so that we can continue bringing you in-depth information about your favorite gemstones. And today, we focus on rubies. What is ruby? Ruby is a red version of a mineral called corundum. It is also only one out of the 4 gemstones that they classify as precious gemstones. So there's ruby, there's sapphire, there's diamond, and there's emerald. All other stones that we talk about are semi-precious gemstones. So this precious ruby gemstone got its name from the Latin word called ruber, which means red. So the red color in ruby is what distinguishes it from sapphire, because sapphire is also a corundum, but it is any other color of corundum except for red. And this red can vary from that bright red that you see in the polished stones to a deep purplish red like this natural ruby hexagon here, and it could be even a darker red, almost a black looking color, but it has to have some tint of red in it to be a ruby. The top 5 questions we are going to answer about ruby today are: what are the healing properties of ruby? How can you use ruby in your healing practice? What are the different types of rubies found in healing? How can you care for your ruby crystals? And lastly, how do you tell the difference between real versus fake rubies? And stay tuned, because this is also where we are going to discuss synthetic rubies and composite rubies. What are the crystal healing properties of ruby? Now, ruby has been known in crystal healing as the stone of royalty for many, many centuries. It has been used by royals and anybody who wants to elevate their status in life, elevate their form of thinking. So instead of dwelling in that low energy, negative thinking, full of complaints, that kind of energy, ruby helps to lift you up, surrounds you with positive energies, and helps you to think of solutions that will progress you in life. It encourages leadership skills. That is the second thing that ruby is great for: royalty and leadership. And at the heart chakra, the third thing I'm going to tell you is for deep love energy. So it helps you to strengthen your self-worth so that you can command that respect that you deserve. And at the root chakra, it activates that energy of passion for life. So combine all these 3 things and it makes ruby a very powerful stone. Now, for some of you that are sensitive to energies, working with just ruby may be a little bit overwhelming. So I would recommend combining it with softer spiritual energy stones like amethyst, which works well at the crown chakra. So that is ruby in a nutshell. How do you use ruby in your healing practice? I'm going to show you a few ways on how you can use your different shapes of rubies in healing, but then head on over to Satin Crystals. We have a whole ruby meanings page where we have a lot more ideas for you. So first of all, if you have ruby eggs, you can hold them, you can meditate with them anytime you're going through any kind of transition, so that it eases you in and that it reminds you that you are going to come out as a stronger, better person after the change. Hold on to your raw rubies. When you're feeling a little bit vulnerable, a little bit weak, raw rubies are very, very strong. They are very durable. They are like little pillars of strength. So just hold on to them, squeeze them, have them nearby as your pillars of strength. Wear ruby pendants at your heart chakra or all the way down to your root chakra, or have ruby bracelets on which correspond with your root chakra area to activate these two chakras and connect the energies together. You could also have the ruby stones when you're doing a crystal layout and just place the stones on the heart chakra and the root chakra for activation. Place ruby gemstones around your workplace to enhance your leadership skills. These ruby pieces can be placed right on your desk, on your shelf. They are not only attractive, people will be attracted to the stones themselves, but also the energy of your personality. For feng shui, place your ruby stones in your fame and reputation area of your space to help boost your self-esteem and thus elevate your reputation in life. Gift ruby crystals when you are wanting to show somebody that your bond is eternal. Just like rubies are everlasting, your friendship, your love is going to be forever. What are the different types of ruby? First, we have the red ruby. So as I said before, there are those really translucent, bright red ones that you see in all the fancy jewelry stores. But red rubies can also be blackish purple to pinkish red. These are both ruby tumbled stones, and they are known as red rubies because they have that tint of red. On my pendant is also a red ruby. It looks a little bit purplish, and so is this faceted necklace. This is a red ruby as well. So these are lesser in grade than those fancy ones you see in the stores, which is great for us healers because they are much more affordable and we can use them in the exact same way as far as energy healing. They are also much more earthy. They have that hefty feel to them, and the good thing about rubies is that they are so durable that we can use them in all sorts of ways. So these are the red rubies. You also have ruby fuchsite. So fuchsite is a green mica stone, and you can see here that the red rubies have grown within the fuchsite. The distinguishing thing about ruby fuchsite is that the rubies themselves are rimmed in blue kyanite, and the fuchsite also shows some white minerals. So this is a pretty common stone compared to another version I'm going to show you in a minute. Ruby fuchsite comes from southern India, and you'll see it polished in all kinds of ways. So the little red marks in the stone you see are rubies. Here is ruby zoisite, and ruby zoisite is often confused with ruby fuchsite, but I'm going to show you the differences. Ruby zoisite comes from Tanzania, whereas ruby fuchsite comes from India and is much more abundant. Ruby zoisite is a little bit more rare. It is usually a darker green, doesn't have to be, and it does have the rubies embedded just like the fuchsite. However, there's no blue kyanite rim, there's no white minerals within the zoisite, and there are black inclusions known as hornblende. So this is ruby zoisite here in this bracelet. I also have it here in my ring and on this faceted bracelet as well. Another stone that comes from southern India is ruby kyanite. And ruby kyanite combines the dark blue kyanite with the dark red rubies. These naturally grow together. Sometimes it's hard to see the rubies within the stone. You can look really closely at this little tower. It does have some ruby inclusions as well. So this is known as ruby kyanite. Now I'm going to show you a special type of ruby called star ruby. So you might already be familiar with asterism or the star effect. We have some dancing star rose quartz spheres as satin crystals, which you might have in your collection. Ruby does the same thing. When you shine a single source of bright light, you can find the point where the stone moves and the rays look like a little dancing star. So not all of the rubies show asterism. So if you do find one, I'm trying to capture the star here for you. Hopefully you can see it. Looks like a little starfish lit up and moving around the surface of the stone. So this is a very special effect. These are star rubies. So those are some examples of natural rubies and rubies in other stones. Ruby zoisite, ruby kyanite. If you want to know the extra special healing properties of those versions of stones, make sure to head on over to Satin Crystals, the ruby meanings page. Besides the general ruby metaphysical properties, they have special properties on their own. How do you care for your ruby crystals? Now, ruby is a very tough stone. It is a 9 out of 10 in the Mohs scale of hardness. The only stone that is a 10 on the scale is a diamond. So a diamond can scratch rubies, but anything else that you have in your collection will not be able to damage your ruby stones. So that's good news. It is very sturdy, it is very durable. However, you do want to keep in mind that if you do have ruby jewelry, the jewelry components themselves are not that tough. So you want to handle them with care. You don't want to be yanking or pulling or tugging at your jewelry. Now that being said, ruby being that sturdy and tough, you can clean it in water. This is one of the stones that you can use the water method. However, as all stones, if you have a piece which has a natural fracture line, you don't want to keep it soaked in water, as that will weaken the fracture and it could crack in half. So that's some ways to take care of your ruby. If you are looking for metaphysical cleansing, programming, and charging up your ruby crystals, head on over to Satin Crystals Crystal Care page. We have a video on how to do that and also full instructions on the page. How do you tell real ruby from fake ruby? The only certain way is to get it appraised by a jeweler, a gemologist, or send it into a reputable laboratory. The second best thing is to have a trusted seller so they know exactly what they're talking about. If you ask them a question, they have the answer or they know where to lead you. Now, if you want to determine for yourself if your rubies are real or not, here are a few tips. They are not conclusive in themselves, but they will give you a hint and an idea. First of all, as I said, all rubies are red or have some kind of red tone. Now here's an example of two different tumbled stones that I got in my ruby bag from a vendor. However, upon closer look, this stone does not have any red tint at all. It is more of an indigo blue, and therefore it remains a sapphire, because sapphire is any color of corundum that is not red. Now this one here is not bright red, but it does have that purplish red tone, and that makes this stone a ruby. That's an example of why it is important to have a reputable vendor to go to. This vendor obviously didn't really care what the stones were. They just tossed them all together. They didn't do their research, but luckily for us, we know the difference, so we can pass that on to our customers. Now, I don't have a synthetic ruby to show you, but a synthetic ruby is a ruby that is created in a laboratory. It takes only a few months, whereas real rubies take millions of years to form in the earth. Synthetic rubies have the exact same crystal structure as a real ruby. So for us who are just normal healers and people, we cannot tell the difference between synthetic and real rubies, but we can send them in. We could also take a look with our eye loupe magnifier and look inside the synthetic stones, because these are usually very clear, like the clear rubies that they're trying to imitate. And if you don't see any flaws, inclusions, or little imperfections within the stone, you have a clue that this could be a synthetic ruby. You will also be able to tell from the price, because the synthetic rubies will not be as expensive as real rubies. Now, of course, we are talking about those fancy gemstone rubies, not these raw ones that I'm showing you here. So for these raw rubies, you might want to see if they have any air bubbles. Air bubbles mean that they could be composite rubies. Composite rubies are real rubies that have mixed in with glass. And these have become increasingly popular on the market as the years go by because vendors want to either trick you into thinking that these are real rubies to pay a good price for glass rubies, or they just don't know. So these are composite rubies versus real rubies. The price should be different, but in this day and age, we don't really know if they are distinguishing the two. So composite rubies, if you look again in a magnifier, you might see some air bubbles, and air bubbles are distinct to glass, whereas rubies would not have air bubbles, but they may have some other kinds of inclusions. Another way to tell is if you have a lot of clues that you have a ruby, or maybe you think it's a fake, you have a gem testing machine and you can test the stones to verify if it is ruby or if it is glass, or I'll show you here, this strand of what could be passed off as a strand of rubies to somebody who is unaware is actually dyed red quartz. So on the gem machine, it shows up as a quartz, not as a ruby. And lastly, as I said, rubies are very hard. They should not be scratched by other gemstones. They shouldn't be scratched by glass, by knives or pennies or any other softer materials than a diamond. So that is an easy test to do if you have a piece that you can scratch. Now let's talk a little bit more about composite ruby. So as I said, composite rubies are real rubies mixed with glass. And these started appearing on the gem market in 2006, and they have just increased from there. And as the years go by, it seems that there's more and more glass holding the rubies together. So what they do is, as you can see, here's a natural piece of ruby, but it's growing with extraneous minerals. They leach out all of these other minerals, and then they fill the stone with glass to hold the actual ruby together. They could also dye the stone so it looks nice bright red, which a lot of consumers like. Here is an example of a composite ruby ring. Now, if you look closely, you will see the white lines in the stone. These are the areas where the glass is holding the ruby together. So this is a good way to tell if you have composite ruby or not. You'll see these little lines everywhere, kind of like webs or prints in the stone. This means that you have a composite gemstone. Now, people still use composite rubies in their healing practice, so it just depends on you if you like the pure natural stones or if you don't mind composite mixed a little bit with glass, because after all, some stones are already manipulated, they're already polished, they're already set in metal. So it depends on you as a healer if you're going to use composite rubies or not. But of course, composite rubies are much cheaper than natural rubies, so that is one of the draws, especially if you're beginning in the world of rubies. You might want to start out with composite, but the main thing is that you know what you are buying. So you know that you're paying for a composite versus a real ruby. Are you somebody who could benefit from having rubies in your life? If one or more of these statements relates to you, you could use ruby right now. So if you are looking for a stone of royalty, ruby is your stone. If you are attracted to precious gemstones, ruby is only one out of the 4 precious gemstones out there. If you are looking to elevate your state of mind, get out of that lowly thinking, you can use rubies. If you are seeking a leadership stone, if you're ready to rule the world, use rubies. If you want to activate your energy and passion at the root chakra, use rubies. If you want to strengthen your self-worth, your self-esteem, your reputation, then rubies are definitely for you. Do you use rubies in your healing practice? Are you a collector of ruby crystals? Maybe you will be now that you've watched this video. We would love to hear all of your Ruby stories, comments, or questions. Feel free to post them below and I will get back to you. If you need ruby crystals in your collection, we have a whole selection for you at Satin Crystals. We have red rubies, we have raw rubies, we have star rubies, we have ruby zoisite, ruby fuchsite, ruby kyanite, all kinds of rubies for your life. As always, thank you for watching. Do join us at Satin Crystals. We have a VIP club where we send out crystal healing information every single week, plus an SMS program where we text you out the most important of those informations every week as well. Please do join us again. We will be back with more crystal information. Thank you, and thank you for your positive presence here at Satin Crystals.